I think in this climate, it's always celebrating the small successes because that's what are those tiny steps that are making progress. Because progress isn't stopping just because this administration is here. Progress is continuing, and that's what thriving is. We're not going backwards just because somebody says we should. We're continuing forward despite somebody saying we should go back.
I'm feeling queer today.
Welcome back to I'm Feeling Queer Today, a podcast that amplifies the voices of LGBTQ plus young people for listeners like you, whoever you are, and brought to you by the Future Perfect Project. I'm host and producer Lily Mueller, and I'm here today with a very special bonus episode featuring 2 interviews with some pretty outstanding LGBTQ plus folks in the medical field, working tirelessly as advocates for the health of queer people of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences. In a time of increasing threat to LGBTQ plus healthcare, their work is vital, so I'm excited to share their remarkable insights with you here. I was curious about this, so I sat down with 2 people working hard to change medicine and academia for queer people by analyzing the data about what's happening to them. Last year, I interviewed research coordinator Milena Insalaco and research assistant professor Viktor Clark at the University of Rochester following the publication of their paper, New Executive Orders Impact on Research and Clinical Trajectories, Barriers to the Development of Early-Stage Investigators. Written in collaboration with several other individuals, this paper served as an overview of the impact of policy changes in Trump's first 100 days on academia and the medical field. While this interview transpired during the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and some of the federal funding cuts for research has since been restored, the results of these initial executive orders have had catastrophic consequences for early career investigators. That includes undergraduates, graduate students, PhD students, med students, postdocs, and early-stage faculty, particularly those from what their paper refers to as historically and intentionally excluded communities, that will take a significant time to fully reconcile. With all that said, let's dive in.
I'm Milena Insalaco. I use she, they pronouns, and I was first author on the paper. First author kind of means that you lead the paper a little bit.
Lead the concept making.
Yes, the concept making and assign roles to people.
And my name is Dr. Viktor Clark. I was one of the senior authors on the paper, which basically just means that I help provide any supervision or answer any questions that come up across the team. And my pronouns are he, they.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I'm not much of a science person. This isn't much of a science podcast, but we're super excited to talk to you guys. So is there anything that drove you to work in these fields and to do specifically research for LGBTQ plus populations and BIPOC populations? Because I might be wrong, but I assume that 3-year-olds aren't sitting at home being like, I want to be an LGBTQ plus researcher one day. I'm going to do it.
Oh my gosh. That'd be great, though. I would love that.
I was a clinician. I was a therapist, and I was a therapist in predominantly substance use settings. So I did inpatient. So if people were going there for rehabilitation, and then I also did outpatient. So if people were doing kind of one-on-one counseling sessions, I did both. And when I was doing substance use counseling, I saw a lot of trauma, but I also saw a lot of similar experiences as to stress that people were experiencing that was more at this higher level of not having access to healthcare, not having access to affordable food, not having access to better ways to cope. I also noticed there was just a lot of lack of access to a lot of resources that were pretty accessible to people if they could pay for them. So that really sparked something in me to go into kind of a more public health route. So my PhD ended up being in social behavioral science, which was a more integrated PhD. And while I was doing that, I remember Googling one day because I came from substance use. I also was really interested in HIV because a lot of my clients had experienced HIV in their lifetime as well. And so a lot of my clients were queer. And so I started looking at queer identities. And I also wanted to know, though, what other experiences did queer individuals have? What other ailments aside from HIV and substance use that are very stigmatized in the community and always set as these are queer issues? And so I Googled it and it was nothing. There was no answers because there's a lack of sexual orientation and gender identity information that's collected across the United States in databases that really didn't point to a lot of helpful information. And I thought that was a huge issue. And so that was basically kind of the launch of why I wanted to do the research that I did, which is how I ended up getting into my research now for young adults, because I knew that talking to survivors was great, but I wanted to have an impact at the beginning of the cancer experience on the prevention side. I wanted to be able to help young adults not go through the same thing. And so that's how I kind of landed in this space of helping young adults, especially queer young adults, being able to prevent cancers in their future.
I think I was always very social justice focused, like ever since I was like very young. Like I went to like the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Museum and I was like obsessed with that for a little bit, which like I feel like is not something that someone in second grade is like, oh, I love Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but that was me, you know? And actually, as a child, I didn't know you could be LGBTQ. I didn't know that existed until I started to watch the show Glee, which I was not supposed to be watching, but I think it did really open me up to at least knowing that, you know, LGBTQ people existed, and therefore it led me to discover that I am also part of that community. And while I was also learning that, I also learned that LGBTQ people experience high rates of hate crimes, bullying, depression, anxiety, suicide. So I kind of had this internal intrigue in it and interest in it. But I think because of the stigma around it, I didn't want to explore it. Like throughout high school, I kept switching what I wanted to do. And then the pandemic happened and I was at home. That happened my first year of college. And I think when you have that much time alone to yourself, things start to be like, oh, I want to do something that makes me happy. My interests of social justice, but then psychology and mental health and everything combined. And also my instructor was great. I ended up staying connected with him and like writing a paper with him later. So after that, I talked to some people and I was able to become a research assistant in a lab doing work on bisexuality. I was able to do an internship at a sex therapy clinic. I now am in this role where I do qualitative research, which means interview-based research. I like it because I say it. A lot of people say it's like the research is storytelling, and I think that's really impactful is hearing people's stories. And I do it with LGBTQ people with cancer. So I guess that's my story of how I got here, and I'm trying to continue as best I can with everything that's going on.
In as simple terms as possible without sort of, blubbing over the content of the paper, what is the topic? What does it cover? And what was your hope to cover it with?
Maybe I'll start with our goal of the paper and where it came from. So we saw this call out for papers. Different publishing companies will say, we're collecting different papers on this certain topic. So this one was on the first, I started as 90 days, but I think they changed it to first 100 days of the Trump administration. And both of us, being in LGBTQ science, have been impacted by this and have seen fear of not knowing what's going to happen and seeing things already impacting us. And so we both were thinking, okay, people aren't really thinking about how these executive orders, how the administration in general is affecting early stage, early career researchers. So people who are in graduate programs, people who are in postgraduate programs. And we also even included people who have not gotten into graduate school, but are looking to apply for graduate school. So I guess our goal of the paper is to review that and share that, by limiting opportunities for early stage people, we have the potential to lose a generation of researchers, specifically people who are being targeted by these administration, what we call historically and intentionally excluded individuals. So people who are BIPOC, people who are LGBTQ, people conducting that research, etc.
Yeah, and I think during the early days of the administration, we saw a lot of policies really impact a bunch of different populations. A lot of policies that impacted immigration, a lot of policies that impacted our abilities to acquire grants and funding, and then policies that impacted the abilities for LGBTQ and people of colors communities to be able to just meet in communities. And so all of those had huge effects on early stage investigators because of the fact that early stage investigating is a time where you're developing your first experiences as far as your first time putting in a grant, your first time developing your expertise in your topic areas, your first time being able to develop yourself into community and to really say to a community, I'm really committed to you. So in response to a lot of these experiences that disenfranchised communities were experiencing at the beginning of the Trump administration, we wanted to respond in a way, and we were trying to figure out the right way to respond.
I think most people are sort of vaguely aware, obviously, of the cuts that the Trump administration has been trying to make or succeeding at making recently. But if either of you are more familiar with like what specifically, that would be awesome just to have on record.
I would say that a lot of opportunities have decreased. We have an estimated loss of over $1 billion due to grant cancellations. And if we're thinking about, people getting into graduate school, people continuing with graduate school, this is how you fund the people to come. And especially thinking about how a lot of these grants are being taken away from LGBTQ people. I think Lambda Legal recently put out a statistic that over 300 grants, specifically with LGBTQ plus populations, have been taken away. That's a crazy amount.
Yeah, I think the cuts kind of have this trickle effect. So I think when the cuts started happening, it was really loud and clear that there was just intentionality behind all of these different policies happening simultaneously. So before, these policies were pretty sporadic. So it seemed almost like only one community was getting attacked at one point in time. And so it was kind of like we could respond and then we could recover. Now it was kind of like all of these communities were being attacked all at once. And so there was no time to comprehensively respond or comprehensively recover. And because of that, we have really started to see a huge loss of a younger generation going to med school, a younger generation being trained as researchers, as psychologists, as therapists, as clinicians.
I feel like we in the Zoom know that it's important, but if you have any information off the top of your head or even like feelings, like soft feelings about why is it important that everyone be represented equally in like healthcare and in research and science in general?
We currently work in cancer care, so I can talk about it in terms of cancer care. Trans people experience health disparities on every single part of the cancer continuum. So thinking about screening, they're less likely to get screened for certain cancers. Thinking about when they're diagnosed, they get diagnosed later at higher stages of cancer. Then on top of that, there's not a lot of studies out there about this. So the few that we have are showing that we have these health disparities, but then we have very few studies on survivorship, for example, with trans people. And then we also have a lot of people experiencing fear of discrimination and discrimination while they go through care. Cancer is already stressful enough. We don't need people to be on top of that worrying, if I bring my same-sex partner to the doctor's appointment with me, because this is very common in cancer care. You bring your partner with you to appointments because it is very emotional. It can be good to have at least someone to drive you home, and then they're worried that someone is going to make a comment or something is going to happen because they brought their same-sex partner. And even if nothing happens, that's just a fear in the back of your head that is not needed.
We have to think about the experiences of all people, and that all people's experiences in the United States has not been equal and it has not been the same. Historically, there has been experimentation on people of color in this country. There have been epidemics for parts of the LGBTQ community who have been wiped out because of the AIDS epidemic. There have been experiences with a lack of support during even the most recent epidemic with COVID, and who experienced worse access to vaccines, worse access to healthcare providers. That was from studies that we've seen, typically people of color and LGBT individuals, or if you meet at that intersection, you are even more at risk of facing worse outcomes in this country. And so when a person enters a room that is coming from a more historically and intentionally excluded background, they might need more resources, they might need more tailoring than another person. We don't anticipate that that individual takes away from a person who comes from a more advantaged background or a less historically and intentionally excluded background, but it is to say that their needs are different and might be more significant than another person.
I live in a house where the news is, my father's reached the age where he sort of just watches the news 24 hours a day, so it's always on. And even I feel like you hear like vague, like we're cutting this, we're cutting this, we're cutting this. But again, it's so unstable. It's kind of wishy-washy. It's like threats some of the time. So do you feel like there's anything that the average person that's maybe not involved in science, like average Joe, can do to sort of help fight back against these cuts and the attacks on existing databases that are already happening?
I think the average person can educate themselves. I think not only educate themselves about what's going on, but also understand why is this important? I would say for people who have privilege, standing up for people who are early career, people who do not have the privileges in terms of, having tenure, may not have as much financial stability, etc. Having resources for them, or even just being a person to talk to about this, someone to support early career people, we have said is really important.
When you talk to somebody and you say to somebody that an action is happening at a federal level that is making it where funding is becoming so difficult for people to receive, and that funding is going towards people being able to develop the next cancer treatment that a person can get, or the ability to run a clinical trial so they can figure out, is this treatment more effective, less effective, has more or less side effects than the current treatment. All of those are like real things. Like, we work with young adults who are on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter all day long. And so if they can't understand it in like a very quick way, they don't care. And that's the main idea behind our lab, is that everything in science is tangible. It's real. It's really just having these conversations with somebody who is on the ground doing the work right now and saying to them, this is the real impact that this is having.
And I think that's really what we're getting at. Like, it does impact real people's real lives, which I think is sometimes lost in translation. And I appreciate what you were just saying, Viktor, of like it's concrete action steps for how to support people like surviving the time that we're in, because it is the time that we're in. I don't know if either of you felt like you wanted to speak on that, being that we've talked sort of about the impacts, but not quite about how do we work from here, basically.
So we said we want people in positions of privilege and research to be able to develop safe spaces for early career investigators, particularly for people of color and those who identify as LGBTQ+, to talk about these events, such as mass firings, such as executive orders themselves, and grant terminations, where this can be talked about and discussed non-judgmentally. We also wanted people to speak out about the issues of inequities. Despite there being a lot of fear of consequences, I think a lot of people are scared of saying anything right now, of pushing back, and worries that they will get fired. But we really want people who have that privilege to be able to at least push a little bit to be doing so, because these are real attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, which is an attack on people. This is an attack on transgender health. This is an attack on First Amendment protections and immigration. The goals of these attacks are to dismantle higher education and promote fear and censorship, especially of people who have been excluded throughout history. And then lastly, we want people to provide allyship, support, and mentorship, especially to early stage investigators whose work is being targeted. We talked a little bit in the paper about how some community groups that were specifically created for LGBTQ, BIPOC people are not around anymore. Since the administration. I know there's been some conferences that have been canceled that specifically were to support LGBTQ people. They don't always list a reason why, but we have to assume it might have to do with the administration going on. So I think it is even more important during these times to think about, how can I help mentor these people?
I think my biggest message to young people is just keep showing up for yourself, be as authentic as you can for yourself, and then also recognize that when things have gotten hard in these communities, like, people have still come out and thrived. And so it's just trying to figure out who the right people are to surround yourself with that are going to help you find your way to thrive through this. I agree with Milena a lot. Like, mentors really matter. I don't always think mentors are always older than you, though. I think you can have peer mentors as well that are people who are going through it as well, who can help you realize that one, you're not alone, and two, can help you problem solve to get to the next day. And tomorrow always brings something new. Sometimes it's a new challenge, sometimes it's a new success.
Okay, we're on the last question, the Future Perfect Project. So we always try and ask everybody, like, what's your vision of a perfect future?
We want everyone to have access to care and to feel comfortable getting care and to try to have people face lesser barriers to care in general.
One of the things that I would love to see now to help the future is investment in the future, because I think that the future is really like happening today.
Yeah.
And it's not just happening tomorrow. So I feel like a ideal future would be where we pause and we realize that having a conversation with somebody today or investing in somebody today will really be that much of an impact tomorrow. And so it's worth it. It's worth the investment. It's worth the investment, whether it's a monetary investment, whether it's a emotional investment, whether it's a mental investment, whatever that investment is in today for tomorrow is really beneficial. And older generations being able to pass on their words of wisdom, pass on their financial gain, pass on their mental successes, I guess. That's what future, I think, looks like for me, is being able to pass the torch on in a meaningful way. So that way that torch can keep burning and burn in a new way, but continue burning.
Our founder would vibe with you in a major way, because they always say the first thing, like Milena, they said, is that in a dream world we don't exist. And the other thing of the organization is like the youth are the future. They're already here. You gotta listen to them. Thank you both so much. This has been so amazing. Happy publishing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
That was such a great conversation. It's super cool to see people across different disciplines working towards the same goal of equity and liberation for queer people. I'm a creative person, and I always think of the sciences as sort of numbery and unemotional, and this really changed my perspective, especially hearing about how Milena conducts her research. Something that also interested me was something Viktor said, essentially that queer people have always survived. We've lived through every attempt to wipe us out, and we'll do it again. He emphasized that what matters right now is finding people, building community, to live through this. The news cycle can be super saturated with bad news, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of bad stuff happening, but it is good to know that there are people out there fighting so hard when it would be so easy to just give up. Thank you, Milena and Viktor, and everyone out there that's still fighting to make academia and medicine more equitable and accessible for all of us. Next up, I interviewed a physician to get the bedside perspective on the state of LGBTQ+ healthcare here in the US. Patty Robertson is a lesbian OBGYN based in San Francisco who has made it her life's mission to make family planning, sexual health education, and high-risk pregnancy support more accessible to folks everywhere. But before we could get into her work, I had to hear the story that led her to it, which starts, coincidentally, decades ago, at the exact college I'm graduating from soon, Mount Holyoke. Now that's some queer intergenerational magic. Here's Patty.
I went to the Jesse Jones Medical Library at Virginia Medical Center in Houston. When I got involved with Bonnie, my first girlfriend at age 16, there was like 2 books that had 2 articles with lesbian in them. And I just felt so alone. But you're absolutely not alone. I'm Patty Robertson. I'm she, her pronouns. I live in San Francisco, and I graduated from Mount Holyoke in 1972. So I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and was raised in Houston, Texas. And the reason I found out about Mount Holyoke was my high school counselor at my public high school had gone to Mount Holyoke. And I was interested in science because I wanted to become a physician. I didn't know what kind of a physician. I just knew that I had a calling. And I loved the catalog at that time. We didn't have computers then. It had a girl reading a book in a tree. I loved to read. I love tree houses. It's funny how these subjective things can kind of push you over.
I was also beckoned to Mount Holyoke by the trees in the books. So not much has changed in that respect. Growing up, did you have any inklings maybe that you might be queer or lesbian, or was that sort of something that happened later on?
Growing up, I loved my Girl Scout troop, and I always fell in love with my camp counselors at summer Girl Scout camp. And I actually got involved with my first girlfriend on a camping trip at age 16.
And then you went to Mount Holyoke to study. So you get there, I assume, late 60s?
1968.
Okay, so a year before Stonewall. At the time, there's no record of any like official LGBTQ plus student organization. Do you feel like while you were there was definitely students that were talking about it or were not talking about it?
Nancy, who I fell in love with at Mount Holyoke, we actually went to the school psychiatrist, Dr. Jennings, to decide whether to come out to her parents who were in New Jersey, who were in the middle of a divorce. Jennings announced to us as soon as we sat down in the health center, the Patty Grove Health Center, that he had been working at Mount Holyoke for decades, 50% time, and he had never heard of any lesbians being college students there. Of course, Mount Holyoke was founded by a lesbian educator. And then he watched what we did in bed. So we just pretty much said thank you and walked out after about 10, 15 minutes. Nancy didn't come out to her parents at that time, but she was welcomed by my family, not as my partner, but just as someone who was a friend to me. And she and I got split up by the computer match for residency. And she got matched at USC in pediatrics, and I got matched in OBGYN at UCSF.
So you matched into OBGYN. Within that area of specialty, I know there were and there remain to be like disparities within the care of like lesbian and bisexual women and of trans people that were assigned female at birth. Do you feel that that's changed over your time working in that field?
I think it has, not enough, because there are a lot of disparities still, and now we're being attacked. All the LGBT research grants have been canceled by the current administration, and it's just been terrible. But yes, and there's been a ton of progress on reproductive access in terms of creating families.
You mentioned the cuts that we're getting now under the second round of the Trump administration. How have you been navigating that as a physician, as a person?
I've lived through the AIDS epidemic where you couldn't put AIDS in the title of your grant, and you always had to have a heterosexual control group, but those grants did eventually get funded. This is much, much worse. I have a colleague whose 90% of her research portfolio is on LGBT, and 90% of it is canceled. So she had to dismantle her staff, which took years to assemble. And it's just totally tragic. But the destruction that's happening can't be fixed with the new administration. This is long term. They're doing AI searches of our websites and our grants. And if you use the word diversity, they're using that to target. And one of the programs I am co-director of is for underrepresented pre-meds at UC Berkeley in medicine. We basically really kind of changed the website. Although it's not directly federally funded, we're backing off to try not to draw a lot of attention, but we're very committed to this. And it's made a huge difference in these young people's lives in terms of getting to their dream of being a physician.
When you were a young person, what was your vision of the perfect future?
Well, as a young person, the perfect future was freedom of speech. Everybody could pursue their dream career and receive education that wasn't like out of reach financially, and that everybody was not judged and accepted and stigma would disappear. One of my issues growing up is I absolutely wanted to be a mother. And that's why I thought I had to be at least bisexual, because I'd never heard of any lesbians having children. But I did, in a different kind of way, fulfill that. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. I just think all people need to have their reproductive wishes fulfilled, whether they decide they want to be child-free or they want to have children, or they want to co-parent or adopt or foster. Our community fosters children in a much higher proportion than a heterosexual community does, which is an amazing contribution to society. These things just aren't recognized. I wish they were. That's my dream.
You've done your part to try and make that dream a reality.
Well, it's a tiny part. And one of the realizations I've had is we can't do this without allies. There's some really important research about the reaction of parents to their child coming out. Caitlin Ryan did some research that showed the experience that an adolescent has in coming out affects their risk of homelessness, depression, substance use. It really is critical. a lot of are homeless in San Francisco are LGBT, about a third of them, and a lot of them from other cities where they're being kicked out as a teenager from their homes. One of the most important organizations that has surfaced in terms of LGBT research is the Williams Institute, which is within the law school at UCLA.
I think a lot of people in general, but a lot of people my age especially, maybe have trouble sometimes connecting with people that they feel different from. Do you have any wisdom from either the world of doctoring or from your life about working with people that you maybe don't agree with or that you're different from?
I just think you need to go connect and have a relationship that's individual. People are people. You're not going to change them necessarily, but you need to be able to have a conversation. Communication is so important. And I mean, I joined Pacific Coast OBGYN Society, which is for leadership in the West Coast and OBGYN, and it was an old boys club. It's really come light years, almost to where I would like it to be, but it's taken years of work. And that's okay, because it's been in existence for 87 years now, and it's evolved. It's been the people who have differences of opinion, they respect each other, and they mostly work it out.
We're a pretty small podcast, but most of our listeners and most of the team is people between like 12 and 20, so younger people in their teens, early college age, high school. Do you have any words of advice you might want to give that you feel like you haven't already covered?
There are so many people like you. Just because you don't feel like you fit in at high school doesn't mean you're not going to fit in and find your own ally groups when you get to a broader world. We know that being in the closet is really bad for your mental health. But for some people, it's life-saving to stay in the closet for a while. This is what the research shows. You only need one adult person in your life. It could be a friend's mother or father. It could be a special teacher. It doesn't have to be your parents. That'll keep you sane and be able to thrive eventually, even if you're feeling closed in at this particular time. So don't give up hope. It gets better.
That was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's good for me to reflect on my journey. Everyone's journey is going to be different, and there's so much work to be done. But take care of yourself, because otherwise you can't do the work.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lily Mueller, and you've been listening to I'm Feeling Queer Today. For more information and resources about this episode, check out the show notes in the description, or check out the episode page at thefutureperfectproject.org/podcast. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and share the show with your friends, family, or even your doctors. A 5-star rating goes a long way to support us in making more episodes. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you go back and check out the rest of the episodes from this season, wherever you get your podcasts. Season 4 is launching this summer, 2026. Also, we want to hear from you. That's why we set up our own online voicemail box for you, our listeners. To leave us messages, go to speakpipe.com/IFQT and drop us a line. That's speakpipe.com/IFQT, where you can let us know what you think of the podcast and if there are any topics you want us to cover on the pod. And don't forget to ask yourself, how am I feeling queer today? If you or a young person you know between the ages of 13 and 24 is currently in crisis, visit thetrevorproject.org for LGBTQIA+ specific support through text and chat, or call 1-866-488-7386. These resources will be in the show notes too. IFQT is produced by the Future Perfect Project with support from Radio Kingston, WKNY, Kingston, New York, and our I'm Feeling Queer Today podcast cohort, Alex Massey, Parker McKenzie, Samuel Smalls, Eric Eubank, Zorian Edwards, and me, Lily Mueller. Our theme song is performed and composed by Alex Massey and produced by Emma Jane Sislowski. This episode was hosted and produced by me, Lily Mueller, with additional producers Emma Jane Sislowski, Becca Di Gregorio, and Ryan Amador. With additional thanks to FPP co-producers David Artavia,
Celeste Lazine, Kiko Wan, and Aaliyah Jamil.